And welcome to a book review on Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility. So here's the copy I have here. It's got the pictures of the characters from the 2008 making of the film based on the book. This review I'm going to do the synopsis in case you don't read it or haven't read it. And also a few interesting points during the synopsis that I think are worth talking about. Stuff that you can get out of the book in case you don't read it yourself. Now, I do encourage, if you don't think you'll ever read it yourself, I do encourage you check out, not the 2008 making with these people in it, Kate Winslet and, right there, Emma Thompson and all those people, Hugh Grant, whatever. I don't recommend that you watch that because it's a Hollywood making of Jane Austen. And the Hollywood version doesn't. You lose all the Jane Austen quality. It's even if you watch. I don't recommend you watch it, but maybe some of you have. They actually flip the characters. Some of the characters aren't even true to how Jane Austen portrayed them. I recommend that you that you watch. There's a 1971. It's on YouTube. It's a British, was a TV series, and all the actors are British, of course. It is far closer to the actual book, and it's very good. I watched it all the way through before I did this review. So I've got a few notes that I'll go through, and like I said, I'm going to go through the synopsis and the setting and all that. And while I do that, I have a few little comments I want to make. And I'm also going to quote directly from the book in some places. I've got page numbers. So the setting is in the southwestern England, the late 18th century. So we've got horses and buggies, but certainly no automobiles. The book surrounds the life of two sisters, Eleanor, who is the oldest, and Marianne, who's the middle child, and they have a younger sibling, but that person doesn't really matter. And the book is pretty much about their life and also about romance and marriage that they encounter. And there is one brother in the family, so there are four siblings. I believe actually the oldest might be the boy whose name is John. He's a minor character, but he is important at the beginning anyways. So we start off with the father. He dies. His name's Mr. Dashwood. Dashwood is their last name. He dies and leaves an estate to his son, which is typical of the time period. Usually men held property. So he left the estate to his son, and in the will, the son is expected to take care of his other siblings and, of course, his mother, who is now widowed. So his son John is already married to a woman named Fanny, and it's interesting at the very beginning of the book because Fanny is, I don't know if I should say, she is very petty with money. And they have a debate back and forth about how much money John should give his sisters, and I guess if you watch the 1971 TV series, it's very well done. So it first starts out as an annuity, they get money every year. But Fanny convinces him to get rid of that annuity by saying that your siblings are actually only your half-siblings, and your mother is actually only your stepmother, which is true. And so he says, okay, I guess they're not as, I guess the bond is not as strong. So I'll give them £1,000, and then just £1,000 lump sum, and that's it, each. And then Fanny says, "Oh, but we don't want to give them too much, or maybe they'll only attract men who want them for their money. We'll attract fortune seekers," she calls them. So we should give them less than 1,000. And so John goes, "Okay, 500. I'll give them £500 each." So that's where it ends up. So it's just kind of an interesting little scene. And they also leave the estate. So John, it's hard to say kicks them out, but they're expected to leave, and so his stepmother, and stepsisters all move out and move to a different estate. And I'm going to read a part from the book now because it's kind of interesting. Marianne, the middle child, has kind of a passing out of the house that's kind of interesting. It reminds me of Shakespeare. I can't remember now what maybe Romeo and Juliet, but there's a part in Shakespeare this kind of reminds me of. So this is on page 40. I have the Signet edition printed in 1995. So page 40. Many were the tears shed by them in their last odious to a place so much beloved. Dear, dear Norland, said Marianne as she wandered alone before the house on the last evening of their being there, when shall I cease to regret you? When learn to feel a home elsewhere? O happy house, could you know what I suffer in now viewing you from this spot, from whence perhaps I may view you no more? And you, ye well-known trees, but you will continue the same, no leaf will decay because we are removed, nor any branch become motionless, although we can observe you no longer. No, you will continue the same, unconscious of the pleasure or the regret you occasion, and insensible of any change in those who walk under your shade. But who will remain to enjoy you? That last little bit, and I had to look this up, that comes right out of Nietzsche's Thus Spake Zarathustra. The very opening line, or not quite the opening line, but he talks about the sun, and he says, what would your happiness be without those for whom you shine? It's the same thing, and Nietzsche actually comes after Jane Austen. So I wonder, did Nietzsche get that line from Jane Austen? I don't know. I don't know when Jane Austen her works were first translated, because this work, Jane Austen first published this in 1911, and Nietzsche was born in the 40s, 1840. So I guess by then I'm sure they would have had a German translation of Sense and Sensibility, but maybe not. Maybe Jane Austen really wasn't famous in the mid-19th century. I don't know, but it seems like it's so close. The other explanation is perhaps both Nietzsche and Jane Austen took that from something else prior. I don't know, but I thought that was neat. It's very similar to Nietzsche. Okay, so continuing on. So here is where we enter Edward. Edward is going to be Eleanor's love interest for most of the book. Edward is Fanny's brother, and so Fanny is John's wife. Edward is a very nervous man, and he stutters, I guess. And you'll notice that if you watch the 1971 TV series. And Eleanor has this strange drawing habit, and Edward, of course, likes what she has to draw, even though Marianne kind of ridicules her, which is kind of interesting. Next, we also introduce now Colonel Brandon. He is going to be, he is, I guess maybe I should leave it, but he's a man that enters, and he's a bit older, though, than the others. He's about 35. I guess I didn't do the ages. Apparently Marianne is 17. I believe Eleanor is in her early 20s, and Edward, I think, is about the same. So Colonel Brandon's a bit older, but he enters as a friend of the family. So a bit of stuff kind of happens. You know, I imagine that Jane Austen, I imagine that Sense and Sensibility is not Jane Austen's best or considered her best. I think her best is considered Emma and perhaps Pride and Prejudice. Another little factoid, Jane Austen wrote her best novels in her last 5 years of life, which is kind of strange. But back to the book. So eventually they're on this estate, right? Consider this estate like a mansion out in the country. So not in a city, but out in the country, And so what people did at those times when they were at least middle class and didn't really have to work is they would just roam. They would just run. Men would go out and hunt, or women would just kind of walk on the paths and enjoy the scenery. And so the sisters often did that. And so one of these particular times, Marianne and Eleanor are out walking around, and Marianne sprains her ankle on something. She trips and falls and whatever. And at that point, another man enters now the story. His name is Willoughby, and he'll be an important part of the book. So Willoughby enters, and typical romance beginner, Willoughby comes to her aid, and she can't walk, I guess, because of her ankle. So Willoughby picks her up, like in a typical wedding carrying kind of thing, and takes her back to her house, or to her estate. And so now Willoughby enters as, well, a love interest of Marianne. And they do all kinds of cute things during the book. They have this horse ride that, well, you can read about it yourself or watch the TV series. And they essentially, Marianne is she's 17, and she is very emotional and just beaming with joy because of Willoughby, and just in general, she's just that kind of person. And Marianne becomes very attached to Willoughby. But interestingly enough, Jane Austen has carefully crafted this book, as she doesn't show Willoughby being as interested, and that becomes important later. So then next, at one point in time, Willoughby and Marianne are in a room. I remember there's a few points in the book when everyone's out of town and Marianne wants to stay home. Well, of course, right? But anyways, there's another point in the book when they're alone together, Marianne and Willoughby. And then all of a sudden, Marianne runs out of the room they're in. I guess it must be on the main floor. Runs out of the room, all upset and crying and all that, runs upstairs to her bedroom. And then Willoughby exits, and of course Eleanor and her mother are sitting there and asking them, like, what was that about? And all Willoughby says is he's kind of now very withdrawn, and he says that he has to leave, and he's on business, and he doesn't know when he'll be back. So at this point, to the reader, we only can predict that there's been a breakup, and then that's it, and Marianne's devastated. So that kind of side plot ends at that point. It's left alone for a while. Now Edward visits the estate, and I guess this is one of the main points that I think one can get out of the novel. Edward constantly belittles himself. He doesn't appear to have a lot of confidence, and Eleanor is defensive about. She doesn't like Edward doing that. And there's a quote that I want to read. I guess it's just a phrase that Eleanor says to Edward, that belittling oneself is a form of vanity. And I think that's actually a pretty interesting line that one could think about, and perhaps write an essay if they had to, if you're reading Jane Austen for high school or something like that. That belittling oneself as a form of vanity, perhaps not intended to be so. So to talk about vanity, let's define it. So the dictionary here says that vanity is conceit or pride, self-absorption essentially. So what would it mean to say that vanity, that belittling oneself, putting someone down is a form of vanity? Well, perhaps it means that if you constantly belittle yourself, then you're not worried about failure because you are a failure. And so it's a protection, it's self-protection from failure as vanity, which is very strange, but I guess psychologically speaking possible. If you are not expected to do well, then it essentially protects that small confidence you have in yourself to begin with. You may see it often in school settings. Kids that do poor in school will belittle themselves to protect the small amount of confidence they have. So, anyways, I think that's an interesting, the first interesting piece of Sense and Sensibility. So the next part is actually another interesting piece, I think, from the book. There's a debate between Marianne and Eleanor regarding what gives true happiness. Is it wealth or is it competence? Marianne says that it cannot be wealth, that happiness cannot be purchased. Money can't buy happiness. Everyone hears about that. But it's competence that makes one happy. Where you can find happiness is competence. Eleanor actually says the opposite. Eleanor says that no, you can be intelligent but be miserable. You can be, if you were the most intelligent person in the world and everyone else had a low IQ, let's say, everyone else were stupid, you might feel very lonely. You might even feel very lonely in your own environment if you think high-minded things and all your friends or your family really just don't get it. They don't even aspire to think in those ways. Often intellectuals feel lonely in their, like I said, high-minded thoughts. So Eleanor says the opposite. No, competence is not it. Wealth is it. And by wealth, we're not just talking about money. We're also talking about profession, about not so much wealth in the sense of just having cash, but in the sense of security, in the sense of being confident that one can get wealth, that wealth is there to have. So, for example, in a good profession, you can be guaranteed wealth. You can be more. It's like job security, right? Another thing that came out of this little debate between the two of them is that they both agree that fame is not part of happiness, true happiness. And I thought that was interesting because we often, for some reason, aspire celebrities. We believe that celebrities like movie stars and etc., sports athletes and etc., they have all kinds of fame. And we expect, I guess, when we see them walking down the red carpets, and I don't know if anyone buys those stupid magazines, People magazine and whatever, with these pictures of all of them. I guess we aspire celebrities as kind of like the demigods of the modern era. And we believe that their fame is a part of their happiness. But then we hear celebrities committing suicide, drug overdoses of musicians and things like that. And so we have to wonder whether fame is a curse. Consider, I don't know, I imagine most of the audience to this video will be American, but any British out there, consider the life of the new couple in Britain, the Prince William and Kate Middleton of Britain. What has Kate... So Prince William is already famed because he's a prince of Britain, of the old monarchy. But what is Kate Middleton married? She has married fame. Does she know what she's getting into? It's an interesting question. Some people would prefer to be left alone. Fame would be bad. It would mean no more privacy, essentially. Privacy will be harder to acquire rather than being someone who doesn't have a name, and one can live out their life just fine in that way. Okay, that's it for that little piece, interesting thing about happiness. So there's another quote here I want to read from the book. I don't have a lot to say about it, but I think it's something that might be worth thinking about. So Marianne, this is from Marianne, she says that never a person be in love more than once in their life. And this is, of course, in the novel, at the point where we believe Marianne and Willoughby to be ended. And so it makes sense for Marianne to say that she had risen the roller coaster of love up to a height and then has collapsed down. And so she's depressed, and of course she makes a statement that I will never find love again. Okay, next part of the book is another little bit of devastation. This book is a bit of a roller coaster for the characters, but what's very interesting about this book is the two main characters deal with their crises differently. That is a very important part of this book. Marianne's character and Eleanor'S character are very different. Perhaps I'll say a few things about that now. Like I did say before, though, Marianne is very much the teenager, emotional roller coaster herself, up and downs, and you'll see more of the evidence of that as we go through the book. Eleanor is very much the opposite. She internalizes her problems. She is very calm and collected out front. She is contemplating everything. She's rational. I guess I'm comparing this pretty much to her sister. She is the opposite. She's rational. She thinks through her issues, internalizes her problems. Emotions, a lot less emotional. A lot less. So at this point, Eleanor finds out that Edward is actually engaged to another person, another woman. They don't know the circumstances. They arise later. And this person's name is Lucy. She's a minor character. And Eleanor and Lucy actually have a few conversations. And Lucy asks Eleanor to keep her engagement to Edward a secret. And I can say a little bit more about that now, but eventually it'll become a larger issue later. Lucy was promised to... Edward promised to marry Lucy a long time ago when they were teenagers, kind of like a high school sweetheart kind of thing. And Lucy has kind of reminded Edward of that. And Edward, being an honorable man, as much as he is a nervous wreck and not very confident in himself, he has honor, and he at this point, but Edward doesn't really talk very much during this period in the book. We assume that Edward is granting this proposal from the past, kind of thing. Another part of the next part of the book is kind of a generalization of probably the beginning middle of the book. Marianne and Willoughby, as being a couple, is spread around the area of England. The rumors spread, and everyone believes that Marianne and Willoughby are going to marry. Very few know that they're already broken up and there's issues, and it becomes like a disease in the book. Everyone seems to think that it's going to happen. It's just like the reason why I mention this is just kind of interesting. The phenomenon of rumor spreading is in the book, and is for the Marianne Willoughby thing. Next thing that happens is there's a party, and Marianne and Eleanor are there, of course, and Marianne sees Willoughby there, and Willoughby sees them. They're sitting on a bench or something, and Willoughby sees them. And eventually, I don't remember if he walks over or if someone gets him and then brings him over. I can't remember now, but he's very distant, and he doesn't really acknowledge Marianne very much. It's a cold relation, and it's very informal. And after that occurs and Willoughby's gone, I believe they leave, and Marianne is hysterical. She's very upset about that. by the way, I guess I didn't mention, in the meantime, Marianne's been sending him letters, and it doesn't really talk about what's contained, but essentially Marianne's wondering what's going on. Next, Willoughby returns a letter. He sends a letter back to Marianne, and I'm going to read a part of it because it's written. It's better that I read it than try to. I don't want to bastardize it because it's very well written, and so I'll begin. My dear madam, I have just had the honor of receiving your letter, for which I beg to return my sincere acknowledgments. I am much concerned to find there was anything in my behavior last night, so that's the party, that did not meet your approbation. And though I am quite at a loss to discover in what point I could be so unfortunate as to offend you, I entreat your forgiveness of what I can assure you to have been perfectly unintentional. I shall never reflect on my former acquaintance with your family in Devonshire, that's where they live, without the most grateful pleasure, and flatter myself it will not be broken by any mistake or any misapprehension of my actions. My esteem for your whole family is very sincere, but if I had been so unfortunate as to give rise to a belief of more than I felt or meant to express, I shall reproach myself for not having been more guarded in my professions of that esteem. That I should ever have meant more, you will allow to be impossible when you understand that my affections have been long engaged elsewhere. And it will not be many weeks, I believe, before this engagement is fulfilled. It is with great regret that I obey your commands of returning the letters with which I have been honored from you, and the lock of hair which you have obligingly bestowed on me. I am, dear madame, your most obedient, humble servant, John Willoughby. So that is pretty much the typical. I didn't really like you. You kind of got ahead of yourself there in thinking that I liked you. That's strike one, or like slash of the heart number one. Slash of the heart 2 is I've been seeing someone else. Slash of the heart 3 is that we're soon to be married. So that's pretty bad, and Marianne is, well, she's devastated. And another interesting part about this right here, this piece, is that Marianne and Eleanor talk about the letter. And Marianne's devastated, of course, and Marianne says this to Eleanor. You cannot know what I suffer. Edward loves you. You must be happy. What could have made you otherwise? It was interesting about all this is at this point, Eleanor knows that Edward is going to marry this Lucy person. And so Eleanor but Eleanor can't tell anybody. And Eleanor has promised to keep it a secret. And so all this time, Eleanor has been suffering internally. And now Marianne says this, because of course Marianne doesn't internalize anything. She will externalize her emotions any time that they arise. And so it's an interesting part here. And it gets resolved later, but it's still another show of the contrast of the characters. And even a disagreement between the characters, showing they don't understand each other. Okay, next. So once this occurs, this letter, the whole rumor of Marianne and Willoughby marrying is gone. And people start to hate Willoughby. They think he's a bad man to do that to Marianne. Probably somewhat exacerbated because of how Marianne handles situations. as well as Willoughby. The person he marries, the person that he's supposed to marry, I can't remember her name, but she's minor. I don't think she doesn't even speak, I don't think, in the entire book. But she's wealthy. And so people are kind of annoyed about that. They think he left Marianne. By the way, Marianne and their family are middle class. So for Willoughby to leave Marianne, expected to be a good relationship, for him to leave her to pursue this other woman who's wealthy is just gives him a bad rap, right? People are suspicious. Okay, next what happens is Edward and Lucy's marriage proposal thing is discovered.